Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Griffin. I'm the Vice President of Global Customer Success with Olapic, responsible for our professional services, technical support, and account management teams. And I wanted to spend a few minutes today talking specifically about one of our platforms that we call the Creator Platform, which is really all about managing your influencers. And one of the key differentiators that we think is out there is really the difference between influence and influencer and how to build a full spectrum program. But I first want to take a quick step back and introduce us. We're Olapic. A lot of you know us probably from the bottom left-hand side image that you see there, which is really around user-generated content. It's our bread and butter. It's what we became known for. But if you think about these images going from left to right, this is really a walk, crawl, run around what we've been doing in the user-generated content space and what we call the owned, earned, and paid space. If you look on the left, that's a pretty simple activation where there's a lot of user-generated content built around some sort of a hashtag campaign that the client might have been running. But as our business has progressed, you'll see that we've moved into in-store activations, like the example there for NYX, who's one of our clients, or even into syndication, where we are taking some of our clients' content and their UGC for their particular products, which would be very popular for a consumer packaged goods brand that maybe doesn't sell direct to consumer, but gets a lot of great content for their brands and from their campaigns. And then they can push it out to other, to retail partners like Sephora or Ulta or Walmart and others that we work with. So multiple ways in which our brands across apps, across their retail partners, in their stores and on their websites are using and leveraging content programs. And one of the real iterations that we are seeing in this space is really all around influencers, as brands are looking to get more content, to get the right kind of content, to reach the right kind of audience, to reach a new type of audience. They are often leveraging influencers. And as we look at this space, we think a lot about how the influencer space and how this has changed over time. And one of the big things that's changed in the influencer space is the ability to manage them, right? What happened is there were a lot of trigger events early, and companies like Clout, that was probably frankly too early in the life cycle, where a lot of brands weren't really ready to talk about influencers and now are, and are now ready to work with them. You know, we just held a customer advisory board the other day, and one of the things that I asked was, how does the company feel about, how do your brands feel about influencers and user-generated content and kind of the whole space? And almost unanimously what the brands came back with was it's no longer an argument internally that the user-generated space is important and that the influencer space is important. It's really just how to manifest it and how to handle it. And we all know about the example here that we showed of the Fire Festival. And I would argue, half jokingly, that the Fire Festival, the influencer part worked. What failed was the execution and the festival side of things. But if you think about building hype, building brand awareness, all of those elements really worked from the influencers. And so a little bit tongue in cheek there, obviously there was a lot of bad to go along with the good in that festival and that event. But point being that influencer marketing is really here to stay. And we've reached a point now where, as we kind of think about heading up that slope of enlightenment, where it's getting really productive, and productive means scale. And a lot of things around scale are about, if you think about how many influencers there are, and we all know about the macro influencers, and you don't need a system to manage working with a Kardashian or a mega influencer like that. But you do if you're working with hundreds or even thousands of micro influencers that have very influential pools that they work with, and have super hyper focused and dedicated areas of knowledge that they work with. And we see a lot of our brands working very successfully with those hyper focused influencers. And when you're working with those hyper focused influencers, it means you have to work with a lot of them. And when you work with a lot of them, it means that you have to have a system to manage it. So as working with influencers becomes undoubtedly productive, you also have to think about ways that you can scale that operation. And really, it's not about building hype, it's about building trust. So what do we mean by that? A local poll was just run, and one of the things by Edelman, and they ran a survey, and they said, if you heard about a company from each person, how credible would they be? And they looked at various experts, like academic experts and CEOs and various people, and actually listening to the brand themselves. And what they found overwhelming was that people trust people like themselves. So it might not even be someone they know, but people like themselves who have similar social profiles. And so getting that trust from your peers, or people that seem like your peers based on their social profile, what you know about them, what you're able to glean about them, what kind of brands they buy from, what kind of brands you buy from, bands they're into, music they're into, movies they're into, all of that builds into an environment where you can trust this person more so than you might kind of develop that institutional trust that used to exist in the past that some brands had or even some corporations had. It really becomes now about trusting your peers, and it's not just your peers, but also those that are like your peers. So that's really what the power of the influencer network is. And as we looked across a broad swath of clients, one of the things that we wanted to talk about here, and by the way, just as we measured influence, it was really as we looked at these brands, how often were they using hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored in their social profiles? And it's not so much that some are at 1% and some are at 14%, but that basically every single one of these beauty brands is somewhere on this spectrum. They're all using influencer type posts. They're all driving this conversation with an influencer share of voice. And so how effectively that driving that conversation really influences what they're doing in this environment and how effectively they're pushing it and how effectively that they're able to share that voice, because there is a Wild West component right now where a lot of that share of voice is still out there for brands that are willing to push and really be aggressive around using influencer content, using user-generated content, pushing their influencers for the right kind of content. And a lot of that depends on the ability to manage a large breadth of influencers at once. And the ability to manage that is not easy because there's inbound and outbound in terms of getting the influencers and then getting their content and then using them and managing them and paying them and activating them and reactivating them. It's work, it's hard work. And so identifying yourself with systems and companies that can help you get past some of those hurdles and really start to generate the power and the scale of the influencer network is the goal of all of these brands. So we like to think of influencers really along in terms of, I talked about the macro influencers that are going to create a lot of content, but really when you get down to the micro influencers, they're also creating a ton of content, but they have more than anything, they have a ton of authenticity. And being able to work and being able to kind of combine that with reviews and research, you know, our creator platform engine is able to combine and work with systems like Bazaar Voice and Power Review so that you can combine both reviews and the influencer network, and you start to think about what your point of view is and what your metrics are and how you measure things. It comes down to user-generated content, influencer-generated content, what we call IGC, and there's so many ways now within social media tracking that you can look at referrals and trackable links, incentivizing video views, social likes and follows, surveys, even ratings and reviews. There's so many different ways that brands can really think about how do I try and take these micro influencers and really pivot them and make them advocates and referrers for my business and what I want to accomplish. And one of the really interesting things that we've seen, one of our brands, Doc Martens, they think about the influencer space and the user-generated content space, not so much as enforcing their messaging that they might do with their stock imagery and their model shots, but going out and finding real community-based things. So if you think about Doc Martens and that very kind of traditional hipster environment that you would think they're in, a lot of their community building and social media activation and influencer activation is showing a very different cut and a very different look at that same kind of content. So you might see someone in a suit wearing Doc Martens, very non-traditional look, but again, that sort of broadens the view and broadens out more people who might say, hey, I wear suits and I never thought about pairing that with a pair of Doc Martens. Again, it wouldn't be in that stock photo for Doc Martens, but it might be in some of their influencer and community work that they're doing and going out and finding some of those influencers or using that user-generated content to give people a different spin, feel, look on some of the content that they are bringing in. And really, when you get down to that micro influencer level, that's where there's that real authenticity and also cost effectiveness, because it's much cheaper to work with those influencers. But again, you have to work with a lot of them, and that means working with them at scale. One really interesting example would be from a company that most of you, I'm surely have heard of, which is Amazon, right? Amazon does so much that's below the radar in terms of how they're building out a program for their influencers, right? And this really hits every single touch point that they're across. Which is all about, if you think about, they have elements of their mobile app with Amazon Spark that's built around building out a community for qualified Prime members to share and shop ideas from people with similar interests. Their Amazon Associates program, it's a free to join affiliate program for members to advertise products to their audience. And many of this is really creating influencers out of people that would never describe themselves as influencers. There's an Amazon Vine invite-only program for trusted reviewers to post items about new and pre-release items. And then there's an actual Amazon influencer program, which is an application-based program for qualified social media influencers to recommend products, as well as rewards. We see a lot of linkage and very interwoven nature between rewards programs and influencer programs, and really taking your everyday users and making them influencers by pushing them into rewards environments is really huge, and that's something that we would describe as very up and coming, that Amazon's doing, again, a very good job of, most of it behind the scenes in terms of building out that influencer network and building out a network of people that don't even know that they're an influencer. And it's not just about driving awareness or promoting a product. It's really about building a strategy that in turn inspires consumer trust and loyalty across all your levels of influence. You know, and one of the things we look at, and I'll give you a really brief tour of our dashboard here and the Olapic Creator Platform Engine. I almost like to think of this, going back to business school, as the 5 forces, right? Where if you think about, at the end of the day, there's the content that gets created by an influencer, but there's all these different forces and elements that happen before you get to that last cycle, which is, how do I find this influencer? How do I pay them? How do I test? What are my KPIs? And some of the things that you might be testing might not just be content, but it might be, what are different ways that I can incentivize an influencer? What are different ways that I can activate an influencer? What are the ways that I can ask for them? Should I have an open-ended brief or a very particular brief and a very descriptive brief? So our experts are very keen in terms of being able to lead brands down the path of where they should go, but it all starts with the campaign and the KPIs and what you want to get out of it. And then you start getting into the messaging templates and the emails and all of this. The way we think about it is, you can manage 20 or 30 influencers with a Google Doc. When you start to get past those kind of numbers, you really need to get a system that can help you manage that, because it's not just about getting a piece of content. It's really about activating them and finding them and rewarding them and incentivizing them and writing briefs. And then, just like you're trying to find elements of trust within your peer network for influencers, where you want to try and find influencers, or you want to try and listen to people like me, you can also go out there and try and find, if influencer A worked well for you, how do I find influencer B, C, and D that are a lot like influencer A? And also vet and authenticate these influencers, that they're real, that they're not a bot, that they have the right kind of infrastructure set up that allows you to work with them, and that they've done this sort of thing before. And also things like, do they work with a competitive brand, and that sort of thing. So thinking very holistically about the influencer experience allows you to check a lot of boxes with a system and a platform like ours, that then allows you to really focus on, what do I want out of this campaign? How do I want to write the brief? What kind of content are you getting? Because at the end of the day, that's what's important. So again, just to summarize, there's a ton happening, and a ton happening behind underneath the covers, with a lot of the most innovative brands in the world and what they're doing in the influencer space. But the key ingredient for all of them is that they've got a system and a platform that helps them manage it, because there's just too much complexity between the number of influencers that you're going to want to work with in the micro influencer space, and the breadth of activation, engagement, conversation, and initiation that you're going to have with these influencers for them to be successful, and for them to be repeatedly successful. What we're seeing is influencers becoming ambassadors because they've done things well for a brand 1, 2, 3 times, and then you sign them in and lock them into a longer term deal. But again, as those relationships proliferate, how do you manage it all? And how do you manage it all is really important. And if that's important to you and your brand, and you're looking to really do influence at scale and influence at scale, we'd love to talk to you here at Olapic. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I hope to hear from you soon about your influencer engagement and activation. Thank you.